now 6 weeks ago, we got a visit from this global researcher.
It's when the addiction sets in. And it's subtle. And because it doesn't have the stigma as, say, cocaine or heroin, it's accepted. It's pushed in schools, all of this. And that's why I keep saying unintended. No one's done this on purpose.
His name's Brad Huddleston. He specialises in digital addiction. And every year or so, he joins up with the local police to tour communities here, speaking to students, parents and teachers about the growing dark side of technology. And Sergeant Nigel Dalton from Mackay Police joined Brad throughout May last month on his tour of this region, and they've got some results back from the surveys in those communities. And I started by asking Brad, what was the main content and message of this year's meetings with those communities? And he said it was really all about the apps.
The apps in particular where the children go, they change rather rapidly, and it's kind of, you have to really stay on top of this. And so TikTok, for example, replaced Musical.ly, and it just shot up in less than a year as the #1 app that children go to. So you'll find things, children are spoken to in chat rooms as they play video games, and they're asked to come off of that platform and go into another app. And so it becomes quite dangerous because many times these are adults masquerading as children who are chatting with them. And so trying to keep a finger on the pulse of these various apps that are constantly coming out is quite a challenge. So we were interested to do some surveys and some research as we went along and doing our tour to find out what they're into, what they're watching, where they're spending their time and things like that, so that we can then educate both them and the parents.
And can we just rewind a sec? What's TikTok?
TikTok originally was an app called Musical.ly, and it was very much just an application for kids to lip sync to famous songs, pop songs, rock songs, whatever they wanted to do. It's now been bought by a Chinese consortium, and it's the biggest downloading application in the world at the moment. 70 million downloaded in December 18. So that's reflected through our stats. And what it is now, it's basically a short video of some stunts, some pranks, some singing, but also it's got to worry that there is a fair amount of sexual content, and also possibly instructions on how to self-harm are hidden in there. So there's an awful lot of really entertaining stuff, addictive stuff, but there's also some very harmful stuff in there as well.
Where did you both visit across the region in this tour?
So we started in Mackay area. We went as far west as Moranbah, and we went as far north as Whitsunday. So there were about 22 presentations. 10 of those were to schools in school groups, and then there were about 12 presentations to the adults. So some of them were in businesses, and some of them were in parents of school children in their schools.
And you mentioned, Brad, you did some surveys. Was part of that which apps were being used? What was the most popular, like that TikTok we were hearing about?
Yeah, that's right. And some of the information that we found on that, the top apps that they're using was, two of them would not be a surprise. That would be Instagram and Snapchat. But the new news would be TikTok. And as Nigel was talking about, just the sheer amount of downloads, it shot up and raced up to the top of what they're using. And of course, it's nefarious what they can get into. And so we were trying to educate the parents as well and keep our finger on the pulse of this. And some of the other things that we were wanting to know, for example, the biggest fear in relation to their family's safety and security. Now, mind you, we were talking about cyber issues, but the #1 issue that the parents feared was that the bike, skateboard, or scooter would be stolen. And then secondly would be the car being stolen. And the internet issue didn't show up until third, and that was they were concerned about their child being bullied over the internet. So parents, I think, are a bit what we walked away from that. Parents, we all have this idea that it doesn't really apply to us, that it won't harm us. And so there's this false security. And so they were more concerned about the material things being stolen than they were these virtual things happening. And we want to see that reversed.
So how do you go about convincing someone, particularly parents as well, who have never grown up, in the internet generation, that these things that aren't tangible are still such a serious danger to them and their family?
My contribution to this, and then I'll let Nigel address his part, my contribution is to talk about the brain science. I'll show brain images, for example, of why they're doing the things that they do. The prefrontal cortex, for example, it's the area of the brain where we understand the consequences of our behavior. It's only partially developed in a child. And so they cannot fully grasp what they're doing.
We need to get parents to actually think before they allow their children to download an application. TikTok, which we've already talked about, is actually designed for children over 13.
So of the communities that you both visited, were there instances and people that you spoke to where children had access to Snapchat, TikTok and the like who are under 13?
Absolutely. Well, we have looked at our results. These results are showing grade 3 to 7. Now, there's not many grade 7s who are over 12 years old. So all of these answers actually apply to this age group that shouldn't have TikTok. So the 36% of those people who have TikTok as their number one app that they use shouldn't have it. They're grade 3 to 7.
Brad, what else were you looking for when you were meeting with people this time around?
Well, I was very much interested to know what the engagement on the parental level was with their children related to the digital technology. And so we surveyed quite extensively, and in this grades 3 to 7 group, 89.7% of these students, these children, told us that their parents allow them to have internet-connected devices in their bedroom overnight, because I would estimate 80% of all the problems that we deal with happen at home with the door shut, with the parents totally disengaged. And sure enough, when we polled the parents, only 31.2% of the parents said that they do not allow their children to have internet-connected devices in their bedroom overnight. So there was a huge gap there. And one of the ways I handled that, I would have someone in the back of the room, the auditorium, taking a photo when I took a show of hands of that 89.7%. Their hands would go up. And then at night, I would ask the parents the same question, and you'd have a very small percentage of the audience to raise their hands that they do allow the children to have internet-connected device in the bedroom. And then I would say, well, let's see how your children answered that this morning when I spoke to them at school. And there's this gasp of shock that would go throughout the audience when I would show the photo of all those hands raised. And then I would say, well, look, let's try this again, because we really need to face this thing. Our children are not immune to this. And so I was very interested and alarmed, and I think next year what we're going to have to do is put our heads together and really figure out how to educate so that the parents will engage with their kids, as Nigel has eloquently said, to figure out what they're downloading and put some parameters there.
Brad Huddleston and Nigel Dalton in the studio, and Brad is joining us from Adelaide. He's continuing his tour in Australia. He specialises in digital addiction, and he and Sergeant Nigel Dalton have been touring around throughout May around the tropical north to parents, teachers, students, talking about some of the dangers in using apps and accessing areas online. Brad, what were some of the main questions you received?
Well, some of the questions that people would ask me, what do I do about it? When I would talk about the symptoms of digital addiction, the first one, all of these symptoms of digital addiction are common, but this is an exacerbation. So anger and aggression. And Nigel and I experienced parents who would come to us and they'll say, once I talk about it, they'll say, you know what, my child does hit me and kick me when I try to get the game or the tablet away from them. And so the children will recognize it, and it scares them sometimes, and they will come and say, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And that gives me hope, because then we can then refer them to counseling or whatever we have to do to get them the help that they need. And so they were asking, to answer your question, how do we deal with it? And that's refreshing when it's coming from the kids.
There was one really positive thing from my point of view, that after the presentation for the young people, 92% said they knew how to report cyberbullying, which for us, once we get that report, we can start working with the child and we can refer them to support agencies. We don't know that child's being bullied. The anxiety, the depression, the problems within that child's life will just get bigger and bigger.
And when we look at the worst case scenario, Nigel, particularly things that have happened in this district that you've seen to children or almost happened, have you reminded parents and teachers of that again?
Yes, what you're referring to is when a child is playing a video game, they have the opportunity to speak to other people that they'd never known. They then speak to those other people outside that gaming forum, and then we have some contact which is not monitored. The issue is that in Mackay, in the last year, we've had 3 people try and physically contact those children that they spoke to through the video game and into another platform. That is when serious harm can come to the child, the parents, the family, and our community. And thankfully, we have some very, very good detectives in the background monitoring that sort of stuff. And then thankfully, with the information that we get from the community, we can actually stop those things happening. And we just want to make sure that everybody is aware that this is such a dangerous area, that we could have a child go missing, be abused, be assaulted very, very easily. And the gateway is through the internet.
Sergeant Nigel Dalton, also with Brad Huddleston, a digital addiction expert who's been touring again in this region on his Australian tour at the moment. Just wrapping up what came of those meetings and talks around the tropical north last month. And if you want any information, you can head to Brad's website. That's bradhuddleston.com. He's got more tour dates up there, including some of his books that are available. And you can always get in touch with us here or Mackay Police to find out any more information on some of the surveys from those talks and meetings as well.